very lucky today to have Lance Dalek with us. He is the fearless leader of the IRB review here on campus, and is incredibly helpful and approachable, and I think really wants to make sure that the process is streamlined for all of you. But it is an important process to go through for many reasons, and he'll explain those. But let's welcome him.
Yeah, you are lucky to have me because I turn grades in on Tuesday, and it's the start of summer for faculty, and we're on 9-month contracts. So it's like double time, triple time.
We're paying you well.
So yeah, I am happy to be here, and as Corey said, my job is just to, for those of you that are going to do projects that would fall under the category of human research, to let you know what that process looks like here. If you're not sure, hopefully in the next 45 minutes to an hour we can sort of have a little bit of an answer of yes, I need to do this, or no, I don't need to do this. So what I want to talk about is my role, what I perceive my role to be as the chair of the Human Research Committee. What's the purpose of human research here at Western? Human Research Committee here at Western. I want to try to spend a fair amount of time with this, and we're going to ask a couple of you that I know. I've talked with Corey that already have pretty specific projects in mind. We're going to discuss your projects and really answer this question: is it human subject research? So you have that answer: yes, it is, or no, it's not. Then just several nuts and bolts answering what, why, how questions for you, common questions that I get. Point you to some resources, and if any time if you have questions, just let me know. I brought my son with me, but he disappeared. I told him I was going to talk about Star Wars, and he said, okay, I'll come. But he heard one of these talks before, and I think he knew it was a trick. So my role is, as the chair of Human Research Committee, not to be Darth Vader. I'm not the bad guy. Not the one who's going to say, you have to do all this paperwork. No, your study's not approved. Right? You have to make 10,000 revisions. I'm a good guy. I'm Luke Skywalker. And I've been back at Western for a couple years. Before that, I was at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. I did my PhD at the University of Mexico. And I've experienced horrible human research committees in terms of how they function, how much work they make faculty do, how much work they make students do. I think it's extremely unnecessary. These projects that I know you're planning on doing, whether they're research or human research, or their projects I'm sure you're excited about. It's probably underpins the foundation of the program. And I'm not going to say take away all your enthusiasm for that project by making you jump through all these hoops. So for instance, the process at the University of Auckland was 2 or 3 months before you got any feedback. Usually 40 or 50 pages in part of your application. And it's a nightmare. And so when I came back here, I wanted to be on this committee because I do a lot of research myself. And I wanted to make the process easier, friendly, not cumbersome. And so I think Corey probably agrees. She's been on the committee with me for a year. That's my philosophy. That's what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm a good guy. I'm trying to facilitate what you're doing while still allowing us to remain within compliance of what Western as an institution requires. So just a little bit about what is the purpose of the Human Research Committee here at Western. We're really just trying to, with the projects, with human research, to follow federal guidelines. We have to comply with federal guidelines in protecting the research participants, protecting their best interests. And there's going to be several things I'm going to talk about here shortly of what we're trying to accomplish in terms of protection. So really this whole process, it's in the best interest of the university, right? It protects the university, it protects faculty, it protects you, and most importantly, it will protect potential participants. So the Human Research Committee reviews application and makes sure everything is good for all those different constituents. So how, sort of, and just a little brief background on why we have human research committees. Why do we have those? And that's because worldwide and in this country, there's been some notorious unethical research. And probably the most notorious study that took place in this country, it started in the 1930s, a Tuskegee syphilis study. Back in the 30s, syphilis was untreatable, and our US Public Health Service sponsored this study. Major health organization was the one initiating the study. They wanted to study the pathophysiology of syphilis. It was untreatable, so they wanted to see it from infection all the way to mortality. So they enrolled individuals with syphilis, controls. At the time, there was no treatment. And because if it's untreated, ultimately leads to mortality, the individuals enrolled the families were provided a burial stipend. And they enrolled individuals who were of low socioeconomic status. They were just told they had bad blood. They weren't really told what the study was about, what they had, just that they had bad blood. Right, so some deceit there, clearly some deceit. And in the 40s, penicillin was found to be a form of treatment, a valid form of treatment for syphilis. However, this study continued. So individuals who could be treated, death could be prevented, right? Individuals infected their spouses, they infected their offspring over this time, right? The study continued while studying the pathophysiology of a disease, when there was a treatment that was now available. So clearly unethical, clearly not in the best interest of a research participant. Ultimately in the 70s, this all came to light, and out of this report was generated. It was called the Belmont Report, and it was some things that participants should expect if they're taking part in a research study. So you should have the right to not participate. It's voluntary consent people give to participate in human research. Right to confidentiality, and this might be something that kind of comes into play with some of your projects of who you're potentially interacting with, and then what you do with that interaction, with that project, and how it's maybe publicly disseminated. Are there people that don't want themselves as an individual, and how they feel about an issue in the public light? And a big one is also a participant can expect experimental responsibility. So if you're interacting with someone, are you qualified to do so? The appropriate qualifications. And is there a clear benefit to society? And if there's risk, what is that risk? Is that risk potentially justifiable? So these are things we want to ensure, right? If you are going to be having interactions with humans and it's considered to be research, are we ensuring that these expectations are indeed met? So what is human research? This is very important, probably the most important slide of the talk today. This is what we apply on the committee to what you're proposing to do. If a project meets both of these criteria, it's defined as human research. If it meets none or only one, it is not defined as human research. So first, systematic investigation designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. Are you contributing to the knowledge base in your field? And oftentimes a tick to that is, are you going to take what you find and publicly disseminate it? Are you going to present at a conference? Are you going to write a paper? Is there going to be a report? But are you advancing knowledge in your field with your project? And 2, human subject means a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research obtains data through intervention or interaction with the individual or identifiable private information. So those are our 2 criteria. And what I want to do here shortly is ask some of you who have a pretty good sense of what you're going to be doing to share that with the group, and then we're going to apply this criteria. So I'm in exercise and sports science, right? So here's an example of a project that I do. We have a lab, right, across campus, and we bring humans into this lab and we do different tests where we collect expired gases. During exercise, we collect blood. During exercise, we have interventions to see how cardiovascular disease risk factors change as a result of different intensities of exercise or different modalities of exercise. Is that, and then we take that information, I usually with my students present at a conference, and then we write and publish in a journal article. So we know that chronic disease is a big problem in this country, so we're trying to see, well, what's the best type of intervention to modify cardiovascular disease? Is that human research, according to this definition? Yes?
Yes.
Absolutely. So we're trying to contribute to the knowledge base. Right? It's a systematic investigation, and we're collecting expired gases, we're collecting blood. So that's clearly human research. But you guys are in a different discipline than me. Okay? And Corey and I have talked about this, and this is, I can't emphasize this enough, was we're working with you for the first time. Right? This is the first time we're doing projects in your area that may have to go through the Human Research Committee. So don't want to make you jump through hoops, right? However, if you're doing human research, then an application needs to be submitted. So what I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time and ask, and Corey's going to have to help me, but some of you that have some projects that you're pretty much going to be starting pretty soon, I think, from the sounds of it. If you could share that with the group, and then we'll apply our definition of if it falls under the realm of human research.
Any volunteers? Anyone want to? Yeah.
Yeah, I am thinking about putting together a survey, distribute within the community to get feedback about property and what people like to see there. Just
Okay, so a survey. You're going to be surveying individuals, right? And potentially obtaining identifiable private information, potentially?
yeah. Yeah.
So probably meets that
Yeah.
criteria, correct? Would everyone agree with that? But what about this? Is it a systematic investigation? Are you developing some knowledge that you want to share with the greater community? How do you intend to disseminate that information? What are your plans at this juncture for that?
I think I probably would be analyzed, and then like general trends would probably be communicated. So
But what you're doing, Stephanie, is for an organization, right? So it's like a private, it's a nonprofit organization, but it's still an organization, so it wouldn't necessarily fall under general knowledge, I don't believe.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to expand that to like make a report or a publishable thing of your results, then, right, is that kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we start to try to weed it out. Is if if you're just giving a report, to a small group,
Right.
it's not the wider community. That can be a determining factor of whether this criteria is met or not.
seems like with yours too, if the intention behind it is to inform Cold Harbor about what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
And that seems like the primary intention,
Mhm.
so the intention isn't necessarily to contribute about how all property changed into a nonprofit is
Right.
going to,
Right.
you know, it's more about that one specific, yeah. But,
Yep.
so do you think that for that case, since it's about that specific organization, it probably wouldn't be under human research, or what would be your thought?
So the way I counsel people, the advice I would give is I defer, I've already had this conversation with
Yeah.
people in your area that I'm gonna defer to them to make the call. I'm not gonna say you have to do this, right? So I've got 3 months of summer now. I don't go around in the summer and tell people you have to be doing this human research paperwork, right? It's so. Are you thinking at some point you might want to? So it's, and we haven't really got to risk yet. I mean, this is low risk,
Right.
very low risk.
Okay.
The paperwork that you're going to fill out is going to be in what we call an exempt application. So it's going to be really streamlined.
Okay.
So if the mindset is maybe I'm going to want to do something with this besides just give it to your funding agency, perhaps it's a good idea to do this. Is there another? That's a great one. That's a great one. And I think it highlights that the answers aren't always easy. The answers aren't always easy. Yes, sir.
We're doing a project that will involve interviews here within the Gunnison BLM field office boundaries of resource users and BLM resource managers. That is part of a larger study, so I think the interviews we do here will contribute to generalizable knowledge at this field office that we'll use to make comparisons with other case studies throughout the state. That will be put together in either a report for the BLM, the funding institution, but also for to be published in a journal article or something like that.
So, thoughts on that one?
Is the stuff you're collecting, is that identifiable? The information you're collecting, is that personally identifiable?
I'm a little unclear on what that exactly means. We're going to be asking people specific questions about the way they use public lands. So it seems like it, but I don't know what the technical reasoning behind that term is. Because they could, one of their rights is to be they have the right to confidentiality. Right. So if someone wants that, then we would grant that to them. Right. But they could also, depending on what they say, even if they're confidential, if someone sees it, might know that person without having to know what their name is.
Sure. So if we go back to this slide, certainly one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of protecting human subjects is that right to confidentiality, the right to remain anonymous. And so if you submitted an application, we would be reviewing that and making sure that you're taking sufficient measures to ensure that information that's provided during an interview isn't easily or isn't within reason able to be attached to a particular individual.
Just to give you an example, when I do interviews with people on my computer, I don't label them Joe Blow. I have numbers for each person, and I keep the sheet with the numbers and who they go with separately, so that if someone were to get on my computer and search for, whoever it is, they don't just automatically come up with their transfer. And I think that for this type of research, the risk is low, but if we're offering confidentiality, you just have to be careful in the way that you structure it so that no one can find that.
So if it's a survey, if it's an interview, we're going to look at, are you taking reasonable measures to ensure confidentiality? So as Corey said, a coding system with sort of online surveys, you don't ask for their name, you don't ask for identifiables.
But with interviews, you know who the person is, so
Right.
it's kind of always identifiable.
But then as it's reported and it's added to a larger study, the contents of that interview is what's going to be passed along, but not the identifiable information. So again, low risk, and we're not talking about a high risk type of human research study, but there is an interaction where you're gathering information. There's potential identifiable private information. And in your case, it sounds like clearly the intent is to contribute to generalizable knowledge and publish. So I would say with that, quite clearly that it fulfills the two criteria, and that I would recommend that you do an application. And we're going to look at the application after we go through a few of these examples. So does that one make sense to everyone? Question or comment?
What defines systematic? So you mentioned interviews. You're not asking your interview subjects all the same questions. That means it's not systematic. So it's like if they're just informal interviews.
Well, even though they can be somewhat informal and go different directions, it can still be the type of questions that you're asking are thematic, I guess, in nature, and you're trying to answer a specific question. You have a question that you're trying to gather data to answer. And then the sample size is sometimes irrelevant. You might have just a 2 or 3, sample is what you're gathering data on. It's still systematic, whereas you might have hundreds of individuals in other instances.
I just wanted to make a quick clarification. If you're having conversations with people informally to develop your project idea, that doesn't have to go through human subjects. So I didn't know if that's where you were coming from with your question, but if they're informal conversations to help you develop your idea, that's not human subjects research in the sense that you're not trying to contribute to generalizable knowledge through that. You're trying to contribute to your plan for your project. So.
Is there another?
I'm pretty sure mine qualifies, but I'll bounce it off of you. I'm doing a survey initially. I'm collecting all the landowners around the national park out at Kirkham. And I will be asking information that is general, but also will be going out to the college and the paper and everything else. And then from those survey questions, after analysis, conducting like individual interviews to a smaller subset. And I think they qualify for both of those. Just a guess. But I just want to make sure of that.
So I think certainly number 2. I guess what's the grand
I'm going to be
plan?
asking about like conservation values and if they're willing to participate with the federal government, if they like the federal government, stuff like that, and if they live in state. I mean, some personal identifying information, possibly.
And your output, you'll have a report. To whom is that report going to go to?
The National Park Service.
Do a presentation, or you do a presentation anywhere?
Yes. And possibly publishing.
So again, my sense would be that yes, both criteria would be met for that proposed project. Other ones that anyone wants to share about what they're thinking at this juncture? And I can talk to you afterwards if you have something, individually you're thinking of. But certainly, it's good for the group to sort of see what some potential topics are and how this criteria for human research applies. So now we're going to shift into the nuts and bolts of what you have to do if your project falls under the category of human research, and just I want to try to, without being too time consuming, point out what some of the key steps are. So there's a couple different categories. There's what's called exempt, and there's what's called a full review. Exempt means you still have to do it. So exempt doesn't mean you don't have to do it. It means that you're going to fall under a category within the exempt application that really means that the risk to the human participant is minimal, which all the ones that you've shared, very low risk, minimal risk, sort of fall under this exempt category. A full review is where there's going to be more risk than what one would encounter, than what a participant would encounter in daily life. So the example I gave you of someone doing a maximal exercise stress test where we're collecting blood, there's more risk involved with doing that than what one usually encounters in daily life. So that would have to undergo a full review. So most of yours, I think almost all of yours, Corey and I have talked about this, are going to fall within this exempt category. So there's a couple different bonuses to that. One is the paperwork is light. There's not much paperwork that's required. Two, the only person that reviews those applications is me, is the chair of the HRC, which means the process is expedited. I've told Corey that my goal is, if she kind of gives me a heads up of when these are going to be coming, my direction is to get you feedback within about a week. So you're going to find out really quickly, everything's good to go, it's approved. If there's a couple things that we need to revise, you're going to get that feedback very, very quickly. So here's our website for the Human Research Committee on the Western. And if we go down halfway here, there's a whole bunch of forms. And the one you need to fill out for exempt research is this one. It's 5 pages, and what I wanted to focus on for a couple minutes is section 5, and there's 6 categories in section 5 that if your project fits in one of these, we would consider it to be exempt. And I think where a lot of yours, there's sort of 2 areas I thought where a lot of yours would fit in. Just sort of what I've talked about with Corey, what the 3 examples you've mentioned would be. The second one, educational tests, surveys, interviews, or observations. So surveys, interviews, or observations would be one category of exempt research. And then I thought the other one may be this number 5, this public benefit or service program. Because I know from talking to Corey, a lot of your projects are being funded by private organizations.
Well, they're really applied, so they're
Right.
like projects for the Nature Conservancy or projects for the county or another entity.
So for most likely 2 or 5 is what I'm thinking for your projects in this qualifying as an exempt application. So when you submit all of your materials, what do you need to include? And I'll show you an example of this. We have what's called a table of contents form. What I just showed you was an initial review form, a consent form. If you're doing an interview, if you're doing a survey, you include the survey, you include the interview questions, and then a city certificate. And I'll talk about, I don't know if you've talked about city training at all
I'll
yet.
send it out to my advisees, and I think that some of the other folks have probably gotten it from their mentors as well.
Okay, I'm going to point that out just briefly. And then all of this you're going to send as one document. So easiest thing is to scan it all into a PDF and send it directly to me. This is a little different than the instructions on the website, so really quite critical because I'm off campus most of summer, and so I don't check my IRB email from home. So definitely make sure you're sending it directly to this email when you do submit it. So here's what a completed application would look like. Again, it's not lengthy. 12 pages total is all those documents, not 30, 40, 50 pages. Here's the table of contents. Here's the exemption form.
And I wanted to say, most of this is just checking boxes, so some of it is taking small bits of the text from your probably project proposal and saying this is what I plan to do, but a lot of it is just making sure that you're going through and putting, making sure to click the right boxes.
Did you have to fill out, did you have to get a review for this to present to us?
Did I? I asked permission of the applicants if I could share this in an educational setting. They said yes. Survey participant information form. So this is a consent form if you're using a survey. I'll show you on the forms different consent forms for different types of research. Here for these researchers is their actual survey questions. An additional form that may be included is if you're collaborating with an organization, you're interviewing individuals at the BLM office.
Yes.
So they're going to probably have to approve that as well. The administrator of that organization's going to have a short form saying they've approved, that you're doing this project at their facility. So that's, and there's on our forms, there's administrator approval forms. That also may be something that some of you will need to include. And the last item is the city training certificate. I'll show you what that is shortly if you haven't seen that yet.
Can I ask a question, Liz?
Yes.
I'm curious about how many times you get people requesting not to use a consent form, and are there other, what is typical of, because I know I've worked with certain populations where the consent form makes people really nervous, and so I've gotten oral consent, a tape recording, and that's sort of what.
There's a number of options for the consent. There's this consent for exempt research, which is going to be a hard copy that they're going to actually physically sign. What I've shown you here on this example is if you're doing a survey, essentially there's language that says, by continuing to the survey, I acknowledge that in this, I read the above, and I provide my consent. So they're not actually going to write down name. That language takes care of what's required for consent. Interviews, that's another option, is if you get verbal consent. So there's a number of different options, and if you're unsure what's best, certainly check with me. I'd be happy to guide you. Yes?
You may have already mentioned this, but so if we're I guess we'd be the PI on it, we'd have to fill all this out. And a lot of us might have undergrads who'd be working with us.
Yep.
Does their name need to be attached to all of it, or if it changes midway, do we have to submit a new one?
Generally, that's a tricky question to answer. If the undergrad is going to have a lot of interaction with the individual, and they need to know about some of these things in terms of human subject expectations, then it's probably a good idea for them to also be included, for them to go through the city training program. If not so much, if their role is not going to be significant, then it's okay if just yourself as the PI is listed as well as your faculty advisor. So maybe the example I can give you, at least in our discipline, is the study I referred to for all the people that are actually gathering blood, right? That are gathering gas exchange data. They have to go through the city training. The individuals who are just supervising the exercise interventions, and people are coming in and they have a program they follow and they're just supervising that, they do not. I don't include them on any of the documentation. So really, it's how much role do they have, and is it something where that criteria we set on what participants should expect, is that something that you think is valuable for them to know? Yes.
So this person, she submitted the survey. I expect that we would be submitting interview questions. So those would have to be like our final questions, or I could just envision submitting this a couple months down the line, wanting to change that. How that works out.
Yeah,
That's a tricky one. Okay, that's a tricky one. It kind of varies by discipline. So we have a psychologist on the Human Research Committee, and she does a lot of research in the topic of what I call sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? And they ask some questions that are quite invasive, and some questions that have been proposed, the committee has said, absolutely not, you cannot ask individuals those type of questions. They're offensive, they're threatening, and so in that instance, we can't say it's okay to change the questions that you ask. We can't approve a set of questions and then have the individual go off and develop some other questions. So that's so a little bit of perspective of why we ask for finalized questions.
what about informal questions? You're in an interview, you're talking,
Right.
one thing leads to another, but yet you're going to be using that
Yep.
information.
Yep.
I mean, is this just kind of that responsible, best judgment area that we fall into?
Yeah, so for me, it's discipline specific, so I'm not gonna be as concerned about the conversation going the wrong way, maybe in your area, as I am in another area.
Right. Gotcha.
And I think that's probably how the committee feels, I'm speaking not just for myself, but for the committee, in this. And so what we recommend is that the questions that you submit, whether survey, interview, they're your final questions. If it's changed, we have an addendum. So you say, I have 3 or 4 other questions that I want to add. It's a 1-pager. I'm adding these to what you previously approved. So it's not, doesn't mean you have to submit a brand new application. You've taken things maybe a slightly different direction. I recommend, if possible, that you do that. That if you are going to change it, and for me, it's, I'm just trying to be balanced across disciplines and not say, okay, well, you guys, you can change all your questions as much as you want, but then I go talk to the psychology department and say, no, needs to be, you change it. How you do any punctuation, you better send it to me. But I understand your conundrum. And so it's this balance of, thinking about the participant. Are the way you're going to change your questions, is that going to be something for that the participant's going to make them uneasy or make them more vulnerable potentially? If the answer is no, I'm not concerned. But if it's in this category where it could be offensive or harmful, then that's something that we want to have reviewed.
And in the past, when I've done semi-structured interviews at other institutions, I've sort of formatted the questions that I'm planning to ask every single person. And then oftentimes I'll, designate those in some way, like they're all in bold, and then I'll have sub-questions, potential follow-up questions that I think I might ask depending on how that conversation is going.
Right.
And in the past, I've done that to kind of be able to allow myself the flexibility, kind of think about the range of follow-up questions you might ask, and then there's not as much of a need for that addendum.
Other questions?
Is at the end of our projects, is there anything on the back end that you'd like to see a follow-up with?
Yes.
This? And I'm
Yes.
sure you're gonna get to that.
Yeah, one item. Great question. One item at the back end. So I referred to the city program. How many have seen this already or heard about it from an advisor? So CITI stands for Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative. And what it is, if you're doing human subject research, you need to complete this online educational program. It's compulsory that you complete it, and you include a certificate that verifies that you complete it in your application. Not time intensive.
I think I estimated for my students about 2 hours, but it might even be less than that to do the whole thing. It has like some little videos to watch and however.
This is even for the exempt folks?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so it gives you what I'm not going to give you at 4 to 6 on a Thursday afternoon. I'm not going to give you 2 hours of more information on the Tuskegee syphilis study.
Right.
So you start throwing stuff at me, right? My son gets into trouble, wherever he's at. So that's what the city training is. Here's the link, right? A couple hours to complete. You get a certificate. That is emailed to you when you've completed it, and you include that at the end of your application. I already alluded to this. What are the deadlines? There are no deadlines. There's a rolling application submission for exempt applications, so at any time, I suggest to Corey just to try to give me a little bit of heads up. I love Gunnison in the summer, and I try to get out camping and hiking sometimes for a couple weeks at a time, and so if you don't catch me right away, that would be the reason why. But otherwise, you're going to hear back from me really quickly. So I've been doing this here for a couple years. We get usually about 100 applications a year. So I tried to summarize a list of what gets my attention so that I can share that with you, so you sort of know what are some things to make sure that I'm completing and I'm not missing. Just make sure that there's enough detail in the procedures portion of your application, and that's going to be on that main form, that main exempt application form. So not multiple pages, but a couple paragraphs so I know what you're doing. So I can read that and I can understand what you're doing. And remember, I'm not in your field. Okay? I'm not in your field. And frequently, I'll call people up if I'm not sure. I'm not just going to say, well, I don't understand it, so I'm not going to approve it. I might call you up and say, I've got this application in front of me. I just wanted to have you clarify a couple things for me. But just make sure that, when you've submitted it, that, I'm going to be able to understand what it is you're doing. If you're going to be recruiting people, who's your target group of individuals that you're gathering some data on? How are you going to get access to those individuals? Are you going to be in an office where the manager is giving you access to all the individuals in there to interview? If you're doing a survey, how are you going to access the population that you're going to distribute the survey to? So have a little bit of detail in there on how you're recruiting the individuals that you're gathering information on. This probably doesn't apply here, but minors, minorities, sometimes that can bump, especially if it's minors, it bumps it into a full review, because that's a vulnerable population. The thing with minorities, with that, we request that you have translated forms, translated survey forms that you include. And so a consent form or survey, if you have minorities, we would ask for a translated version. So that's why I mentioned minorities. Yes?
What if minors aren't really the target, but they tend to come along for the ride with family? If that wasn't the intended goal, it's just fine.
Yeah. I mean, you're not collecting data on the minors.
No.
They're just there with the individuals that you may be collecting data on.
Yeah, it's a general idea.
Okay. Yeah, I would think that's not an issue then. Any biological materials that are handled. One thing that just came up last week, in fact, and we'll probably have to talk about this a little bit. Who's the one who's doing the insects? So we have an animal research committee, and the institution's saying that if you're observing animals in the field, that the animal research committee needs to be okay with that. That's not human research, it's animal research. They have an equivalent committee, but I was just told that by the Vice President of Academic Affairs, Bill. Bill told me that, so that might be something for some of you we may need to chat about further.
I don't know if this applies to anyone, but all invertebrates are here. They have to be warm-blooded. Humans doesn't count, yeah.
Yep.
That's good.
qualified to perform the research. As I said, that administrative approval form, that needs to be included. Then a couple other items. What else gets my attention? When you submit your application, you're going to get an internal tracking number. As I said, I get 100 applications a year. So I'll ask this in my email correspondence with you. If you are asked to do revisions or if you have any kind of follow-up, please include your internal tracking number just so I know which application that I'm working with. I talked about this. If you do make a change, we have a form. Request for modification or addendum. It's 1 page. 1 page document. Do change your survey, interview questions, change the nature of your previously approved project, you should complete that modification addendum form and send that to me. A few moments ago, is there anything required at the end? A 1 page study closure form. So this will be something that I'll ask the advisors to, if possible, build into the curriculum. But I'll remind them to remind you when you're done to complete this study closure form. Again, it's 1 page. It'll take you 5 or 10 minutes to complete. And that's located on the forms section of the HRC website. Resources. Your advisors. Advisors need to be included on your applications in terms of listing their contact details. They need to complete city training. Their city training certificates need to be included with your application.
So my advisor has to do that as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But you just do it once, I think it's
Yeah.
good for, is it good for 2 years?
Yes.
Or, so like mine is already.
But I would have
so-
to ask Jeff to.
Yeah.
And I would have to include that in the application. Okay. I've got running this.
HRC website's helpful, and then me. Right? I'm Luke Skywalker, right? I'm the good guy. I enjoy doing research. I'm also the Celebration of Scholarship coordinator here on campus, so I'm not joking you. I wouldn't be here on a Thursday at the start of summer if I didn't like research. I didn't like to help you through the process. So if you're unsure of anything, email me, right? I'd be happy to call you up and chat a little bit. I mean, it saves so much time, right? So if you're unsure about your form, your advisors can't answer and they say, hey, call Lance, email Lance, very happy to help you out because it's, you know, usually 5 or 10 minutes we can get everything sorted. And so great resources available, so this can be a very streamlined process for you. And I told Corey I'd keep it under an hour, so any questions that you guys have?
Okay, so I gotta have my interview with my survey questions on there. I gotta have a CIT certificate for myself
Yes.
and my advisor.
Yes.
I have to have my completed exempt application form and a letter of support from any organizations I may be working in or with.
Yes.
And then at the end, I would have to have a study closure form. Is that, did I get all that?
You did.
Okay.
And sort of proceed. Yeah.
Good job, Brett.
Okay.
I did a
got
good
a
job.
list going
I did a
through
good
here.
job.
I got a
Then there's this
spreadsheet.
table of contents form. That's
Okay, so there's,
It just
and that just
summarizes.
you tick off.
okay, all right then.
And that's, if you look at this example, and I'm going to give all this to Corey so she can put it on the blackboard.
Just do it.
But here's a one-page table of contents form where you're just ticking off everything that you're including. Other questions? And if you have individual questions, certainly I'm happy to stay afterwards, so.
Do you have templates for consent forms?
Yep. Yep, absolutely.
Previously I did a NIH certificate. Is that similar or something different? That's what I included in the one I did previously.
Okay.
Is that?
Yeah, probably at your previous institution, that would have been the type of educational training that was required, and so the equivalent of that is the city training. Yeah. So you would need to do the city training
Okay.
and include that here for in the application here.
And we may go on to do the city training. I remember when I went on the first time, it was a little confusing about how I registered. But you just find your institution, right? And then give your email address that goes to the institution. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then, okay.
Yes.
And you can do parts of it and then come back to it, so you don't have to do it all at once.
And the website is, that information was on the page, on the Western page,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, the easiest way to get to this page is if you go to the western homepage.
Yep.
And then just search for HRC.
Okay.
And then the first link that comes up is the Human Research Committee.
Cool. Fair enough.
If we have separate sets of like interviews, or we're doing an interview and a survey, are those separate applications or can that all go together?
That can all go together. Yes.
As far as the recruitment goes, so if we do a poster advertising, like, there's a survey at this link, we
Yes.
submit that. But what about if we wanted to, like, pester people on Facebook? Is that frowned upon?
No, not necessarily. The thing with it is remember earlier I mentioned it has to be voluntary, it has to be consent. And we ask why or how you're going to recruit because people like me, and the professor, our position, I can't go into my class and say, if you don't fill out this survey, you're not going to pass this course. Right? So it just needs to be clear in how you're recruiting that people have a choice. Okay? But certainly using social media is absolutely okay. Great questions. Sounds like you guys have some awesome projects planned. I'll be happy to, hopefully some of them present in celebration of scholarship. We have a couple on-campus events in the fall and the spring where you can share your projects with the campus community. So I'll hopefully see some of those coming up, and yeah, good luck. And as I said, any questions whatsoever, don't hesitate to contact me. So have a great afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you.